Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Christiane Gruber is a powerhouse. Her current titles, Professor of Islamic Art and the History of Art Department at the University of Michigan, as well as the founding director of Khansin Islamic Art History Online, are certainly impressive and well distinguished. Nevertheless, although these titles give hints as to the wide range of her deep involvement in the field, or rather fields of Islamic art historical research, it is when we look at her intensive and extensive CV, filled with 34 pages of her qualifications, publications, fellowships, reviews, and experience, that we are surprised at the intense involvement of this versatile and intellectually agile scholar. It is a true honor for us to have Dr. Gruber to participate in the lecture series of Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyyah. And the Dar is especially pleased to share her presentation here at Kuwait with its home audience. And this evening topic, Dr. Gruber will be discussing a facet of her studies on the Prophet Muhammad entitled The Prophet as a Sacred Spring, late Ottoman Hilye Bottles. I have searched throughout the long and varied list of Dr. Gruber's publications, and I have been unable to find studies of mobile phones. This should give you a hint to lose your phones and turn them off, and welcome Dr. Christiane Gruber.
Thank you so much for that kind and very generous introduction, and I think that was the smoothest segue into prohibiting cell phone use. I think I might be adopting that. Before I start, I want to say thank you to Sheikha Hussa for the warm invitation to come back to Kuwait. We realized that the last time I was here giving a lecture was 16 years ago, and time really does fly much too quickly. It's a real pleasure to be with you and to be sharing my research here in the home institution of Kuwait. What I'd like to do today is present to you a facet of my book on texts and images of the Prophet Muhammad in devotional cultures of Islam. And I believe the first slide. The topic today is about these bottles that have Hilyes inside of them, which are verbal descriptions of the Prophet Muhammad. So let me head in. The Topkapı Palace Library is one of the world's largest and most important repositories of Islamic paintings and manuscripts. It thus came as a big surprise to me when, after a dozen years of research in this Royal Istanbul collection, then librarian Zeynep Çelik Atbaş pulled me aside to tell me that I should take a look at some glass bottles that remain unknown and unpublished, and yet surely would be of interest to me. Zeynep could not have been more correct in her assessment. I was left astounded when the staff pulled out 4 large glass bottles into the manuscript reading room. But these were no manuscripts. Instead, before me were 3 bottles containing Hilyes, or verbal descriptions of the Prophet Muhammad, while a 4th, which you see here, housed a miniature Quran displayed on a wooden stand decorated with colorful beads. Executed by the underglass painter Mehmed Refat and dated 1308 of the Hijri calendar, or 1891, this bottle has at least 4 companion pieces held in 2 other museums in Istanbul. Although I will not discuss Quran bottles today, their production alongside Hilye bottles suggests that these glass containers were intended to house both the icon of God, that is the Quran, and the icon of the Prophet Muhammad through his Hilye. Although new findings surely will emerge in the future, at present I have been able to identify about a dozen Hilye bottles in international collections, and since I published my articles, another dozen have emerged. While one bottle appeared on the art market some years ago under the title of Lodge Hilye, or Tekke Hilyesi in Turkish, and another Hilye bottle dated 1804 is currently on display in the Mevlevi Hane Museum in Galata, in Istanbul, it is evident from the Topkapı Palace icon bottles that these materials should not be restricted to Sufi practitioners and milieus alone. Rather, these rare objects appear to have been used for both talismanic and curative purposes in various contexts, including in the royal palace. Their therapeutic role in particular is suggested by the Hilyes' use in what I will argue is the production of gold powder, which in all likelihood was combined with water drawn from either local Constantinopolitan sacred springs, or else it was mixed in with the holy water that was collected from the Zamzam well in Mecca. As a result, these Hilye bottles, as I'll argue today, provided a new kind of prophetic pharmacon, whereby the Prophet Muhammad was reified and even symbolically ingested as the ultimate elixir vitae, or elixir of life. Since Hilye bottles remain relatively unknown and unexamined, let us first begin with a close visual and material examination of all 3 objects. Measuring 42 centimeters in height, this first bottle, with its tall finial, wrapped in green silk ribbon, is by far the largest in the group. Moreover, its interior is lavishly decorated with a vertical gold rod, which you see right here, whose horizontal perches are capped with dangling pearl ornaments. Other decorations fill the interior of the bottle, and these include wicker branches, flowers made out of brown and white fabric, and round beads that are made out of green and red plastic, a very modern medium when you think about it. This panoply of decorative items comes together to form what we might call Hilye installation art, itself intended to remain undisturbed thanks to the wax that is sealing the flask's neck. So you see how it's sealed with this wax. Thus, the bottle's contents were meant to remain in place and inaccessible in this very particular form. 2 of the 4 bottle sides also display the Hilye, which record Imam Ali's verbal description of the Prophet Muhammad's physical and moral characteristics set into the diagrammatic format that was invented by the famous 17th century Ottoman calligrapher Hafiz Osman. Here, the typical Hilye layout, with its central omphalos, this is the central omphalos, surrounded by the 4 Rashidun, Abu Bakr, Omar, Othman, and Ali, as you can see here, is quite readily recognizable. Also typical is the inclusion of depictions of Mecca and Medina as top pieces, as well as the Quranic verse praising the Prophet Muhammad with the exclamation, "You were sent as nothing but a mercy to all the universes." So many of you already know the وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ here. More remarkably, however, the Bismillah, which you see here, at the top of each Hilye panel is surrounded or surmounted by the Quranic expression, "Indeed, it is from Solomon," so 27:30. This added clause refers to Solomon's protective powers, and it is frequently inscribed in Islamic talismans. The Solomonic statement hints at the item's protective function, and indeed Hilyes were often used as amulets in Ottoman lands during the 18th and 19th centuries. Some, like the panel of cutout work which is currently in the Sadberk Hanım Museum, which you see here, include a number of talismanic devices to protect their viewers, including the seal of the seven sleepers of Ephesus, the Ashab al-Kahf, and still other Hilyes, such as the plaque that is preserved in the Walters Art Museum, so here in reverse because it's a stamp, as you can see, were engraved in metal and used to produce printed amulets. Just like other Hilyes painted on panels or included in manuscripts, these metal objects also were outfitted with designs and Quranic verses that were believed to be particularly protective. The Hilye Bottles' prophylactic qualities are further elucidated by the verses of Persian poetry affixed to the bottle's two other sides. So we have the Hilye on this side and the other, and then two pieces of paper on the other sides, and here are the Persian verses. Let's dig into those verses. They appear to include some misspellings, thereby suggesting Ottoman authorship. Despite a few lingering issues with a few words and phrases, the verses read as follows. And here I'll just translate into English. O Lord, place this divine shadow on the throne of perpetuity and illuminate the sun of the royal sky in perpetual heaven. In addition, the next folio reads, quote, whoever keeps this beautiful Hilye at home will be saved from spiritual suffering, poverty, sadness, persecution, and calamities. When God, his pure being out of mercy, allows it, then without a doubt the owner benefits very much from the Prophet Muhammad's descriptions. And I should mention that this morning I saw a Hilye printed talisman with the same statement in the Al-Sabah collection's Ziyaratname, its pilgrimage scroll. So we see that scattered around. The first panel of Persian poetry praises God through a series of celestial and cosmic metaphors, while the second panel addresses the bottle's owner directly by reminding him or her of the Hilye's shielding capabilities. That means it can protect especially the home, and usually from burning. Moreover, by stressing the supremacy of God, these verses make it clear that this item should not be considered a tool in the practice of magic, but rather a permissible form of harnessing protective energies according to the Solomonic method. As a result, the first Hilye bottle encases a verbal icon of the Prophet Muhammad and turns it into an amuletic form of installation art that is meant to protect individuals within a domestic setting. The second Hilye bottle similarly preserves two Hilye panels, but here the paper folios are mounted on wooden boards that are separated by a long rod that is wrapped in red silk, a detail to which I will return to momentarily. At its top, the bottle is outfitted with a rope and a metal chain, and so appears to have been suspended or carried on occasion, rather than permanently exhibited on a flat surface such as a table or a shelf. The Hilye text is largely placed within an omphalos, so the round area here, girdled by a gold crescent, surrounded once again by the Rashidun. In this instance, however, no mention of Solomon is made. Rather, the first panel's horizontal registers running along the frame include the Bismillah and the Quranic verse of mercy once again. So we see the Bismillah and the Quranic verse of mercy here. The second panel also includes at its top the famous Lauleke Hadith Qudsi that records God as stating, quote, were it not for you, Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, I would not have created the heavenly spheres. It also provides the signature of the calligrapher right down here, Katabahu, right here, Munla, which should be read really Mevlana, like Maulana, Muhammad, or Mehmed in Ottoman Turkish. These two Hilye panels are augmented with Ottoman devotional poetry in honor of the Prophet. Although their meter is not entirely correct, The first two verses read as follows, quote, "Your per name is on the highest throne, Muhammad Mustafa. Your figure is a cypress. Your station is from Tuba to Muntaha." End quote. Here, the Prophet is said to have his name inscribed on God's throne, so on the Arsh, a motif that is rather pervasive in Islamic Mi'raj texts and poems, and his cosmic stature or station is so vast that it is said to stretch from the upside-down Tuba tree all the way to the lot tree of the limit, the Shajarat Tuba. So the next two verses can also be identified as penned by the famous 16th century Ottoman poet Zati. They exclaim, quote, "O embellishment of the garden of illocality," this is Le Mekan, "your station is a cypress of light, it casts no shadow on the ground," end quote. In these verses, the Prophet is described as a fine-figured entity that bears no shadow, as well as a cosmic ornament that is not bound by time or space. Taken all together, the figures of speech and motifs used in all four Ottoman Turkish verses added to this Hilye make clear reference to the Prophet Muhammad's celestial ascension, the celebration of which occurred in palace quarters to the accompaniment of praise poetry known as Mirajiyeh, and the illumination of hanging lamps, which were known as kandil. Perhaps then this Hilye bottle was suspended or ritually carried during Miraj or other religious festivities that were held in the palace, so maybe on Laylat al-Mi'raj. The bottle's possible suspension is certainly suggested by the metal chain and rope that are wrapped around its neck. Other evidence for its use is suggested by the vertical rod that resembles a perfume dauber. When rocked back and forth by its removable cap, this interior rod scrapes at the backsides of both Hilye panels, in the process producing a gold dust that could have been collected and extracted from the bottle thanks to a slightly dampened red silk fabric. Indeed, the gold flecks, which you see here, that have accumulated at the bottom of the flask do not appear to be the haphazard result of wear and tear. Rather, it becomes clear from the object's material makeup that the main goal of this glass bottle consisted in the production of gold Hilye dust. In order to achieve this aim, the artisan affixed gold-painted papers. I hope you can see the gold-painted paper here, and this one has nearly completely disappeared, but you can see the gold paper right there. So, in order to achieve this aim, the artisan affixed these gold-painted papers to the back of both Hilye panels. One on the right still retains its gold pigments in relatively good condition, while the second that you see on the left has witnessed the near total loss of its gilt backing, no doubt due to repeated chafing at some angle. So the rod kept chafing against that paper. Thus, unlike the previous talismanic Hilye bottle that was intended for artful display and protection in the home, this item was meant to be used in some fashion or another. Turning to the third and last Hilye bottle in the Topkapı Palace, it appears to have fulfilled a similar function. It contains only one wooden panel whose two sides are fixed with folios containing the Prophet Muhammad's verbal icon once again. Several details are noteworthy as we move up towards the top of the flask. First and most conspicuously, this bottle is neither sealed shut nor is it provided with a removable cap like our first two examples. Instead, the Hilye panel is affixed to a metal wire that curves in the flask's neck, which rises slightly above the opening of the bottle. As you can see here, here's our metal wire that is made into a handle that you can manipulate, and it's attached directly to the Hilye panel. This metal handle must have been used by an individual to set in motion, shake or rock the Hilye within its container, a kinetic action that resulted in visible interior scrape marks and a loss of pigment on the bottle's lateral sides. Those very same sides carry deeper symbolic import because they are covered in monumental inscriptions that proclaim, quote, "Verily he illuminated the world with the light of Muhammad. Kad nawaraha ad-dunya bin-nur Muhammad," end quote. Here, God's creation of the Prophet's nur, of his light, as a radiant flux, appears to be equated with gold pigment that ornaments the flask's sides. In turn, this lustrous, high luxury material could be transformed into gold dust or powder by setting the verbal icon to motion within its glass container. A close visual and material examination of these 3 Hilye bottles leads us to a number of preliminary conclusions, and they precipitate many questions as well. Depending on use and location, such items could be shut closed, open on demand, or permanently kept ajar. One functioned as a prophet-centered talismanic art object destined to protect an individual and his home. In the latter case, no further interactions were deemed necessary. In other cases, however, a chain and a rope suggest more ritualistic uses, including carrying or suspension in festive commemorations of the Prophet Muhammad or other religious holidays, including the celebration of his celestial ascension. In such cases, a removable cap and a silk-covered stopper enabled the collection and extraction of gold flecks, rubbed off the gilt papers lining the Hilyes panels on its back sides. Last but not least, in at least one instance, this gold dust or pigment is equated with the Nur Muhammad, itself the primordial and generative material used by God to create the entire world according to Ottoman Sufistic thought. These newly uncovered Hilye bottles raise a number of issues concerned with late Ottoman artistic traditions as these intersect with devotional practices dedicated to the Prophet, especially within an Istanbul setting. Perhaps the 2 most important questions that arise are, first, what were the uses and purposes of creating gold dust? And second, what are the origins and hence symbolic meanings of these icon bottles? Examining related artistic evidence can help us expand and refine our range of possible interpretations, chief among them the bottle's likely use in late Ottoman magico-medicinal practices that involved the mixing of sacred dust or soil with holy water in order to produce liquid suspensions and curative potions that were believed to be saturated with prophetic barakah. So let's look at these comparative examples. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Hilyes were believed to protect individuals, their belongings, and especially their homes. Their talismanic energies were believed latent and activated through a number of practices, most especially their viewers' gaze, rubbing, and kissing. A number of late Ottoman illustrated prayer books, known as duanames, include specific directions on how to make use of such practices, which were believed to unleash the dormant blessings contained most especially in the Prophet Muhammad's verbal icon, his relics, and his other marks and traces, his Athar. For example, one devotional miscellany transcribed in 1766 includes a double-page depiction here of the Prophet Hilye, topped by the widespread invocation seeking refuge from the cursed devil. The icon's position as a potent refuge is further strengthened by the addition of a short instructional text attributed to al-Tirmidhi, located at the bottom of each Hilye panel and continuing on the manuscript's subsequent folios. So here you see the Ottoman translation of al-Tirmidhi. As many of you know, he's the author of a Shama'il and Nabi text, and of course a hadith compiler. A Tirmidhi here is recorded in Ottoman Turkish as informing the reader that the Prophet's holy seal contains many virtues or merits. These are the fawaid or fivaid in Ottoman Turkish. Among them, we are told that whoever looks at the seal in the morning after having performed ablutions will be protected from all disasters and catastrophes until the end of the day. The same holds true for the beginning of the month and year, as well as the launch of a trip. Finally, whoever gazes at the seal during the year of his death, we are told, will end his life in faith by the grace of God the Almighty. In still other prayer books, al-Tirmidhi is cited on the necessity of rubbing the seal of prophecy to one's face or eyes, thus proving that the intense looking at the Prophet Muhammad's icons and signs, combined with the scraping of their pigments, were believed to secure safeguard from tragedy, including damnation in the afterlife. Other late Ottoman paintings depicting marks and places related to the Prophet display telltale signs of intrusive interactions with their gold pigments. For instance, one depiction of the Prophet Muhammad's footprint, which you see right here, also held in the Topkapı Palace Museum, displays heavy chafing in its gilt center. This is all lost pigment in the center of the footprint. This is most likely due to the viewer's repeating rubbing or kissing of the image. Similarly, a gold flame-like rendering of the Prophet Muhammad's seal of prophecy, which you see right here, the Muhr Nubuwa, is inscribed in its center with the Prophet Muhammad's name and title. So here you see Muhammad Rasulullah. But all the gold around it shows an intrusive form of rubbing, whereby the gold pigments seep through the registers of text to the bottom of the now darkened folios. Notice all of this debris. Somebody has been actively rubbing the seal. Not solely limited to the Prophet Muhammad's vestiges and marks, such ardent forms of caressing sacred images also extended to depictions of Mecca and Medina, both of which are intimately associated with the life of the Prophet Muhammad. A number of late Ottoman manuscripts of al-Jazuli's Dala'il al-Khairat and other prayer books include double-page paintings of the two holy cities, at times tarnished with smear marks as if they were strategic strikes. So let me head into the detail. For example, one late 18th century copy of al-Jazuli's text displays a loss of black pigment from the kizwa cloaking the Kaaba. Notice the pigment has been smudged, as well as blue and white smudges that taint the dome over the Prophet Muhammad's grave here in Medina. That's the only spot where we have damage, these two spots. It's not by chance. Another contemporary copy of the Dala'il al-Khairat shows similar abrasions, which appear as if caused by the wet flick of the finger, first placed above the dome and then curved kinetically across the grilled chamber containing the Prophet Muhammad's tomb. So notice here how somebody just, it looks almost like a finger mark, wanted to caress the Rauda. And yet, that's not all. Another late Ottoman illustrated manuscript of the same text suggests that viewers actively scraped pigments off of paintings of Mecca and Medina, perhaps with the aim to collect these sacred pigments on their fingers for eventual ingestion. From the Prophet Muhammad's footprint to his seal of prophecy, onward to depictions of Mecca and Medina, the evidence thus points to Ottoman practices of rubbing and kissing sacred images, as well as collecting the debris that flecks off of them, because these are associated with the prophetic corpus and presence. And notice here, this is a very serious smudge right here, and not accidental. Such physically enacted forms of devotion are supported by textual evidence as well. For example, writing during the 17th century, the Ottoman explorer Evliya Çelebi records in his Seyahatname, or his travel book, the pietistic engagements of pilgrims in Mecca and Medina, including his own. Launching into his multi-volume book, he first pleads to God to protect him during his journey with the rhetorical question, quote, "Might I roam the world? Might it be vouchsafed for me to reach the Holy Land, Cairo and Damascus, Mecca and Medina, and to rub my face at the sacred garden, the tomb of the Prophet, glory of the universe. Here, it appears as if the ultimate goal of the author's journey is none other than the overlaying of his face with a prophetic patina extracted from the blessed soil, textiles, grill, and other materials anointed by the Prophet's inhumed body. A little later, arriving in Mecca, Evliya Çelebi then makes his way to the railing encircling the Prophet's tomb, telling his readers that, quote, "There I kissed the threshold, prayed beseechingly, and knelt down," end quote. He then prayed for intercession, so shafa, and nearly fainted. Besides kissing the grill, he also kissed the ground at the Prophet's tomb in Medina, all the while asking for shafa. Our pious traveler also records practices of devotional rubbing, especially in and around Medina. For instance, he includes a short description of a small shrine known as the Station of the Messenger, or the Makam-e Hazret in Ottoman Turkish, which has since disappeared, but it seems to have been located slightly outside of Medina. It was shaped like a small prayer niche and housed the impression of the Prophet's noble head, which surprised me when I came across this text. There he goes on to state that, quote, "Pilgrims rub their faces on this holy place," end quote. Such popular practices of kissing and rubbing were not at all frowned upon or prohibited as they are now today. Rather, they were actively sponsored by royal Ottoman patrons, the sultans themselves, who lavished great gifts upon Islam's holy cities and even ordered the construction of new gates to the Medina Mosque, including one inscribed with the poetic verses, quote, "God forbid that he who rubs his face on your grave should not go free." In other words, that he wouldn't be healed. And here I just wanted to insert the fact that this is quite widespread, this notion of the Kaaba, or the Rauda, being healing, so much so that you also see depictions of the Kaaba in magical medicinal bowls, like this example that was just flagged for my attention. Thank you, Dana. And here these bowls would be filled, of course, with water, and the water would be believed to be impregnated with the barakah of the Quranic verses, and here also with the symbolic presence of the Kaaba. So we see similar kinds of motifs across various art forms. Ottoman devotees' practices of kissing the kiswa and black stone in Mecca, along with the rubbing of soil and the golden grill in Medina, in order to secure the blessings and intercession of God and the Prophet Muhammad, also appear to have occurred within these sites' visual representations, as the painterly evidence so strongly suggests. Although it is clear that such images were touched in various ways, one question still lingers. Namely, where did the now missing pigments of this materia prophetica go? Upon affectionate kissing, did these pigments mix in with saliva, and were they thus ingested by the faithful? Were the pigments smudged with wet fingers and then perhaps touched to the believer's lips or tongues? Or were they collected as prophetic ingredients to be mixed in with other liquids and potions? In other words, what are the whys and wherefores of these fugitive pigments, and how might they shed new light on Hilye bottles? I would like to suggest that these bottles, just like other contemporary devotional icons devoted to the Prophet Muhammad, provided a material mechanism to make and gather gold pigments. The fact that one of them mentions the Nur Muhammad leads us in part to associate such pigments with the Prophet's primordial light. That two bottles also included Hilyes meant to scrape at the inside walls further strengthens this hypothesis. In addition, during the late Ottoman period, the collecting of the water runoff from the ritual washing of the Prophet's footprint, which you see right here, and his mantle was a well-known practice in palace quarters. And in fact, that water was kept in vials and then used for the breaking of fast during Ramadan. This prophetic liquid was then preserved and used as a purative potion also throughout the year. These libations came into contact with the prophet's relics, and they were understood as the ultimate panacea, and such magical medicinal liquids quite possibly included other tonics and potions into which were mixed gold prophetic precipitate that was extracted and poured from Hilye bottles. Textual sources support the alchemical presupposition that gold contained restorative powers, a belief that appears quite widespread in Ottoman lands during the 18th and 19th centuries. For example, one manuscript that records the recipes for medicines and potions that were made in the Topkapi Palace pharmacy includes various antidotes, potions, pills, pastilles, syrups, and ointments, as well as balms to help with stomach aches, cosmetic products to dye hair, and soaps to maintain body hygiene and even stem hair loss. Most important for our purposes today, this royal pharmacy book also includes a number of recipes for medicines made from precious metals and stones, including ground silver, gold, ruby, amber, and pearls. One recipe that stands out is the so-called macune kırmızı, which is the red potion or paste. So this is the recipe for this macun, this potion. Among others, its ingredients include rose water, amber, lapis, pearl, musk, aloe, ruby, and last but not least, gold and silver leaf, altun varak and gümüş varak in Ottoman Turkish. We are told that its curative and restorative powers are many, and that as a general cure-all, it is especially useful in helping with problems related to the head, heart, liver, and stomach. Moreover, it is believed to cure forgetfulness, maybe I should take that macun myself, and vertigo, to make the face lighter in tone, to assist pregnant women to prevent miscarriages, to lessen colic and indigestion in children, and to alleviate illness during plague and other epidemics, which is quite apropos for our times today. To produce this panacea containing crushed gold leaf, the treatise also gives direction of production and use, including the boiling of liquids, the pounding in of various ingredients, the draining of water and cooling in order to create the paste itself, the latter eventually preserved in jars made of gold, silver, and porcelain. Last but not least, in case of need, this healing blend is doled out in small amounts and mixed in with sherbet to be imbibed by those suffering from a wide range of ailments. This recipe's inclusion of gold leaf, or altun varak, along with its mention of pounding its constituent ingredients, suggests that the palace's pharmacy housed rare materials, including leaves of gold, which comprise a stable consolidation of this precious metal that then could be ground into a more volatile powder when the need arose to manufacture new potions. Quite tellingly, gold pigments, flecks, and even debris are a hallmark of two of the Hilye bottles, while one in particular includes a gold leaf backing that is now entirely lost due to pulverization by the interior dauber covered in red silk. It is thus not unlikely that this dauber was moistened and the gold flecks were gathered, perhaps to be mixed into curative elixirs like the so-called red paste. In such a case, the gold's therapeutic potential could be seen as exponentially more effective, having derived from the prophet's blessed icon, itself encased in a precious decanter-like vessel. Individuals thus could ingest or imbibe this prophetic precipitate, whose barakah was believed to somatically fuse with the flesh and body of the Ottoman believer. During the 18th and 19th centuries, these Hilye bottles formed part of a larger production of vessels that included the consecrated water of the Zamzam well in Mecca. Known as Zamzamiyas, these flasks were made of both transparent glass and imported Chinese porcelain, their necks often fastened shut with a rope or thread in a manner that's reminiscent of our Hilye bottles. So notice here the Chinese porcelain Zamzamiyya also shut, and a transparent glass Zamzamiyya likewise shut. More pointedly, the sacred water contained in these Zamzamiyas was thought to heal the sick and bring them barakah through the process of imbibing and hence physical absorption. Still acting as the carriers of Meccan blessings to the present day, Zamzam water bottles are sold to pilgrims to the holy city, and they're in fact produced en masse. And you can buy them in Istanbul, around the Eyüp shrine. Hilye bottles formed part of the larger life world of Istanbul during the 19th and early 20th centuries, at which time late Ottoman Islamic devotions to the Prophet Muhammad appear to have coincided with the cult of healing waters, which was shared by the city's Christian and Muslim dwellers. The belief in water's sacred and curative powers can be traced back much further in time to the numerous ancient Middle Eastern holy springs, lakes, and caves across the Mediterranean basin and the Anatolian plateau. Sacred water sources then became central to Christianity as well, as attested to by the rite of baptism, baptismal fonts, and the spread of holy springs associated with churches and chapels. In Greek, such springs are known as holy water or hagiasma, the plural being hagiasmata, and they are founded in the memory of Jesus' baptism, or else they're dedicated to a particular saint. At one time, Istanbul counted more than 200 such springs. However, today most have disappeared under road, train, and building construction. After the conquest of the city by Ottoman forces in 1453, Istanbul, or then Constantinople's growing local Muslim population, also came to consider such springs miraculous and therapeutic, the belief in sacred water in Islam, of course, stretching back to the earliest narratives about the Zamzam well. In Ottoman and modern Turkish spheres, these springs are known in Turkish as ayazma, a term that is etymologically indebted to the Byzantine Christian hagiasma in the city. Still today, a number of ayazmas in Istanbul are in operation and quite popular. And here you can see some of my photos of one of these ayazmas. Once a week, on feast days and special occasions, they host visitors of all faiths, Muslim, Christians, etc., and nationalities who come to these sacred water sites in order to make wishes, seek blessings, or ask for healing through the practices of visitation, prayer, and votive donation. Most germane to the theme at hand, these ayazmas are filled with decorated icons and bottles containing images of the Virgin Mary, herself considered a sacred source of life, and Jesus Christ. The plastic bottles that are provided here in these ayazmas are often filled or impressed with an icon of Mary and Christ, revealing the extent to which Hilye bottles are connected to Istanbul's Christian and Islamic sacred spring traditions. The oldest, most important, and best-known hagiasma in Istanbul is that of the Virgin Mary as the fountain of life or life-giving source, known as Zoudokos Pege. This church spring complex was founded close to the city's walls in the 5th or 6th centuries, either by the Byzantine Emperor Leo I or Justinian. Textual sources inform us that the church spring effected 47 miracles and cures between the years 450 and 950. Thereafter, during the Ottoman period, the church was destroyed and rebuilt on several occasions, at which time a story about a fried fish, or balık in Turkish, miraculously returning to life after jumping in its spring waters, endowed this place with its present Turkish name, the fish spring, Balıklı. The site was especially active during the 19th century when its church, chapel, and crypt were fully rebuilt and inaugurated after the Greek Revolution. In the wake of its reconsecration, the complex was visited by the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II, who extended financial support and showed respect to various Christian churches, their holy springs, and their attendant religious ceremonies. Around this time, an image made by Thomas Allen and published in Robert Walsh's 1838 travel narrative to Constantinople depicts this so-called Spring of the Miraculous Fishes at Balıklı. It was populated by various visitors, some of whom are shown dipping their feet into the holy spring or using vessels to drink its curative waters. So here you see these individuals trying to heal by using the waters. As Walsh relates in his text, this lively spring was visited by both Greeks and Turks, so Muslims and Christians. At the water source, he continues by telling us, quote, "Priests stood around the spring with pitchers in their hands, which they constantly filled and handed up to those close to them. They were eagerly seized by every person who could catch them and poured with trembling emotion on their heads and breasts, where they were rubbed, so that every particle of the life-giving fluid might be imbibed by the pores of their skin." End quote. Today, the Balıklı Spring retains some of its most salient features, including an icon of the Virgin Mary and Christ's child located immediately above the sacred waters, the latter now illuminated with electric lamps and enlivened by still some swimming fish. The silver-encrusted wall painting, which you see right here, depicts Mary as a life-giving spring as she bursts forth out of the source of water, from which Christian priests, warriors, and devotees seek relief and cure. Moreover, in the painting's foreground, a man in red, who you see here, is shown holding a vessel and pouring the spring's sacred water into the eyes of a man who was most suffering from vision problems, a depiction that is entirely befitting this spring since its foundation includes a miraculous cure for blindness. Although today the image appears as a wall painting, visiting sources describe a mosaic icon of the Virgin Mary instead. This mosaic, we are told, reflected in the spring's water, making it seem as if the image were incubating within it and thus endowing the water with life. As Robert Osterhout points out, it must have been very difficult for the visitors to differentiate the mosaic depiction from its aquatic reflection, and so perhaps it is best to say that the two, the image and the water, the icon and the substance, were working in concert. Filled with the figural image of a saintly figure, as well as charged with its healing power, this new holy spot yielded what might be called an icon water, since the icon here reflected in the water. While the icon water of the Zuidokos Pege spring was most likely collected and distributed in metal jugs and glass vessels in centuries prior, today's visitors, Christian, Muslim, and others, are encouraged to make a monetary donation in exchange for a plastic bottle into which they may gather the holy liquid. Many cheap and mass-produced bottles line one of the walls in the spring's crypt, waiting to be put to good use. Of handheld size and thus highly portable, each bottle identifies the spring by name in an oval that frames an icon of Mary and Christ emerging from the fountain of life. So here's Mary and here is Christ. This icon impressed upon the translucent body of the plastic container generates a similar effect as the mosaic image that would have been reflected in the sacred spring. That is, it appears that the image is incubating within the water, or alternatively, that the icon is coming to life with every ripple of the liquid. What I'll do to make sure that we stay on time, because I've been given a 5-minute warning, I'd like to respect that. I will skip through my Christian icon bottles, as you can see, the similarity here. for the gathering of water, oil, sacred liquid. I'm going to move forward past that. So, just to summarize, there are many of these icon bottles that are Christian, and they're related to the sacred springs in Istanbul, which is where we see these Hilye bottles pop up. So the Christian belief in the therapeutic power of holy spring and icon water appears to have migrated over to Ottoman Muslim beliefs and practices, which to a certain extent still remain quite alive in Istanbul springs today. The cult of water in the city and across the region goes back centuries. However, during the 19th century, contacts between Christians and Muslims, especially at their shared sacred springs, must have prompted an increased exchange in symbolic objects as well. Among them can be counted Christian icon bottles, which may have catalyzed Hilye bottles, the latter transforming a figural icon of Christ into a verbal depiction of the Prophet Muhammad. Whether catering to the Christian or Muslim faith, these types of curative icon bottles nevertheless are united in their indebtedness to age-old water traditions into which they added creative new twists. Based on a close visual and material analysis of these newly discovered Hilye bottles, related Ottoman icons and paintings, vessels for Zamzam water, and Istanbul holy spring culture and objects, it therefore appears likely that Islamic icon bottles essentially provided a new type of prophetic healing in Ottoman lands, including in the Topkapı Palace during the late 19th century. At this time, the Prophet's verbal icon transformed from an amuletic object of visual meditation to an encased relic, whose golden byproduct was most likely mixed into medicinal paste or Zamzam water that was destined to be ingested and therefore alloyed with the body of the faithful. Like the famous Meccan well, the Prophet Muhammad therefore symbolically functioned as a spring of belief and cure. Thank you very much.